The October wind cut through Eleanor McKinnon's worn woolen cloak like a blade, carrying with it the bitter scent of approaching winter and the weight of her shattered life. She clutched her 3-month-old son closer to her chest, his tiny body the only warmth she had left in a world that had turned cold as Wyoming stone. "Please, Papa," she whispered one final time to the unyielding figure silhouetted in the doorway of what had been her home for 22 years. "Thomas is your grandson. Your own blood." Jeremiah McKinnon's weathered face remained granite hard, his pale blue eyes reflecting none of the compassion that had once made Eleanor believe he was the finest man in Cheyenne territory. The same hands that had taught her to read from the family Bible now gripped the doorframe as if her very presence might contaminate his Christian household. "You ceased to be my daughter the moment you lay with that cavalry officer." His voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "And that child," he pointed at the sleeping infant, "bears the mark of your sin. I'll not have shame darken this threshold another day." Behind him, Eleanor caught a glimpse of her mother's tear-stained face, partially hidden behind the kitchen door. Martha McKinnon's hands covered her mouth, muffling what might have been a sob or a prayer. Her younger sister Rebecca peered around their mother's shoulder, her 15-year-old eyes wide with a mixture of sorrow and fear that association with Eleanor might taint her own prospects in their small, unforgiving community. "Mama," Eleanor started, but her father's sharp gesture cut her short. "Your mother has nothing to say to you. We've prayed for your soul, Eleanor, but prayer cannot undo what's been done. The congregation has spoken. Pastor Williams has spoken. You've made your choice, and now you'll live with the consequences." The baby stirred in her arms, his small fist escaping the confines of his swaddling cloth. Eleanor had named him Thomas, after her father, hoping the gesture might soften the old man's heart. She had been mistaken. With deliberate cruelty, Jeremiah McKinnon reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. He tossed it onto the porch boards at Eleanor's feet, the coins inside making a hollow metallic sound that seemed to echo across the empty prairie. $23, he said. "More Christian charity than you deserve. Take it and go. If I see you in Cheyenne again, I'll have Sheriff Morrison escort you to the territorial line." Eleanor knelt carefully, adjusting Thomas to one arm while gathering the scattered coins. Her fingers, already stiff with cold, fumbled with the leather strings. When she looked up again, the door had already closed, leaving her staring at the familiar oak panels that now barred her from everything she had ever known. The journey to Fort Laramie took 3 days of hitching rides with sympathetic travelers and walking when sympathy ran out. Eleanor's sturdy schoolteacher's boots, once her pride, now bore holes that let in Wyoming's October chill with each step. Thomas cried frequently, hungry and cold, and Eleanor's milk was drying up from stress and poor nutrition. The coins in her pocket dwindled with each meal, purchased from skeptical homesteaders who looked at her bare ring finger with barely concealed judgment. On the third evening, as purple shadows stretched across the vast grassland, the wooden palisades of Fort Laramie appeared on the horizon like a mirage of salvation. Eleanor had heard that army forts sometimes needed washwomen or seamstresses, and she could teach children their letters if any officer families required a governess. Surely her education and proper upbringing would count for something, even with the circumstance of her situation. But as she approached the main gate, Thomas began to cry with the desperate wail of a hungry infant, and Eleanor realized with growing panic that she had no milk left to give him. Her body, pushed beyond its limits, had finally failed in its most essential duty. She pressed him closer, whispering empty reassurances as tears she could no longer suppress began to fall. The sentry at the gate, a young private with kind eyes, took in her bedraggled appearance and the crying child. "Ma'am, are you all right? You look about ready to drop." Eleanor tried to summon the dignity that had once made her the most respected schoolteacher in Cheyenne, but exhaustion and desperation had stripped away such luxuries. "Please," she said, her voice cracking, "my baby needs milk. Is there someone here who might help?" The Chapter 2. The Chief's Compassion. The fort's infirmary smelled of carbolic acid and old blood, but to Eleanor it represented the first sanctuary she had known in weeks. Dr. Margaret Henley, one of the few female physicians on the frontier, had taken one look at Eleanor's condition and immediately whisked both mother and child into her care. A wet nurse was found among the camp followers, a Mexican woman named Rosa, whose own infant had died of fever the previous month. leaving her with milk but no child to nourish. "You're severely malnourished," Dr. Henley observed, her no-nonsense Boston accent cutting through Eleanor's fog of exhaustion. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Eleanor couldn't remember. The past week had blurred into an endless cycle of walking, worrying, and praying for Thomas's survival. "I had some hardtack yesterday, I think, and water from a creek." Dr. Henley's expression softened slightly. She was perhaps 40, with steel-grey hair pinned severely back and intelligent eyes that had seen too much suffering to judge anyone harshly. "What's your story, Miss?" "McKinnon, Eleanor McKinnon." The words came out in a rush, as if speaking quickly might make the truth less shameful. "I was a schoolteacher in Cheyenne. I made a mistake. The father was Lieutenant Crawford. He was transferred to Fort Sill before I knew about the baby. My family—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "Threw you out," Dr. Henley completed grimly. "I've seen it before. Christian charity has its limits, especially when it comes to fallen women." She handed Eleanor a bowl of beef broth. "Drink this slowly. Your stomach won't handle much at first." Through the infirmary window, Eleanor could see unusual activity in the fort's central courtyard. A delegation of Native Americans had arrived, their horses tethered near the commander's quarters. Even from a distance, she could tell these weren't the defeated, reservation-bound Indians she'd heard described in Cheyenne's newspapers. These men sat their horses with dignity, their bearing proud and unmistakably free. "Lakota, Doctor," Henley said, following her gaze. "They're here for treaty negotiations. Chief Standing Cloud and his council. He's one of the last holdouts against reservation life." Her voice carried a note of respect that surprised Eleanor. "They say he's a fair man, but he won't be bullied or deceived. The army's hoping to convince him to move his people to the Pine Ridge Agency before winter sets in." Eleanor watched as the leader of the delegation dismounted. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace of a man completely at home in his own skin. His long black hair was streaked with silver, and even from across the courtyard there was something compelling about his presence, a quiet authority that seemed to command respect without demanding it. "He's not what I expected," Eleanor admitted. Dr. Henley raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something more savage, I suppose. The papers back in Cheyenne always described Indians as barely human. The papers in Cheyenne have never had to treat a Lakota warrior's broken arm or deliver a Lakota woman's baby," Dr. Henley said dryly. "I've been here 6 years, Miss McKinnon. I've learned that dignity and wisdom aren't the exclusive province of white men." As if summoned by their conversation, a commotion arose in the courtyard. Thomas had begun crying again, his wails carrying through the thin infirmary walls. Eleanor tried to quiet him, but the baby was beyond consolation, hungry, cold, and surrounded by strange voices and unfamiliar smells. The Lakota chief paused in his conversation with Colonel Morrison, his head tilting slightly at the sound of the infant's distress. Eleanor saw him speak quietly to one of his companions, then begin walking toward the infirmary with measured steps. "Oh God," Eleanor whispered, instinctively pulling Thomas closer. Despite Dr. Henley's words, a lifetime of frontier stories about Indian raids and massacres flooded her mind. Dr. Henley, however, seemed unconcerned. Standing Cloud probably wants to make sure there's no sickness in the fort that might spread to his people. He's a responsible leader. The infirmary door opened without ceremony, and the Lakota chief stepped inside. Up close, Eleanor could see the lines that mapped his weathered face, lines that spoke of laughter as much as hardship. His dark eyes, when they settled on her, held no threat, only a deep, measuring intelligence. He spoke to Dr. Henley in accented but clear English. "Doctor, the child sounds distressed. Is there illness here?" "No illness, Chief Standing Cloud. This is Miss McKinnon and her son Thomas. They arrived yesterday in difficult circumstances." The chief's gaze returned to Eleanor, taking in her worn dress, her hollow cheeks, and the desperate way she clutched her child. When Thomas continued to cry, Standing Cloud stepped closer, his movement so gentle it seemed like a dance. "May I?" he asked, extending his hands. Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse, but something in his manner, patient, respectful, utterly unthreatening, made her hesitate. Dr. Henley nodded encouragingly. With trembling hands, Eleanor placed Thomas in the chief's strong, calloused grip. Standing Cloud held the infant with the practiced ease of a man who had children of his own, supporting the tiny head while making soft, rhythmic sounds that weren't quite words, but somehow conveyed comfort. Miraculously, Thomas stopped crying. "He is strong," Standing Cloud observed, his voice quiet but carrying easily in the small room. But hungry. His mother, he looked at Eleanor again, has travelled far and eaten little. It wasn't a question, and Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. I've been trying to find work, somewhere to live. It's been difficult. Standing Cloud nodded, still holding Thomas, who had now settled into peaceful sleep against the chief's broad chest. Among my people, no mother travels alone with a child unless great sorrow has driven her from her family. The simple statement, spoken without judgment or condemnation, broke something loose in Eleanor's chest. For the first time since leaving Cheyenne, she felt seen rather than merely judged. My family believes I've brought them shame, she said quietly. They cast me out. Standing Cloud was silent for a long moment, his weathered hand gently stroking Thomas's dark hair. When he spoke again, his words would change the course of Eleanor's life forever. Among the Lakota, children are gifts from Wakantanka, the Great Spirit. No gift from the Creator brings shame, only joy. He looked directly into Eleanor's eyes. If your people cannot see this truth, perhaps you should walk with people who can. Chapter 3. A Bridge Between Worlds. The treaty negotiations had stretched into their third day when Standing Cloud made his unexpected proposal. Eleanor had spent those days in the relative safety of the infirmary, helping Dr. Henley tend to minor ailments and watching through the window as the Lakota delegation moved with quiet dignity through a fort clearly designed to intimidate them. She had learned to recognize the rhythms of Standing Cloud's presence, the way conversations seemed to settle when he spoke, how even Colonel Morrison, despite his obvious frustration with the stalled negotiations, treated the chief with grudging respect. Thomas had taken to the Lakota leader with the inexplicable trust that only infants possess, settling immediately whenever Standing Cloud visited the infirmary. The colonel wants us moved to Pine Ridge before the first snow, Standing Cloud explained to Dr. Henley during one of these visits. Thomas cradled easily in his arms. He speaks of government rations and warm lodges, but his eyes hold the truth, that we would be prisoners in all but name. Eleanor, sorting medical supplies nearby, found herself drawn into these conversations. Her education, limited though it was to frontier school teaching, had given her a broader perspective than most fort residents. "What will you do?" she asked. Standing Cloud's dark eyes settled on her with the same measuring look he'd given her that first day. "We will return to our winter camp in the Black Hills. The government calls it trespassing now, but the hills have been sacred to my people since the grandfathers' grandfathers walked this land. The army won't allow that," Dr. Henley said quietly. "You know they won't. The army will do what the army must do. We will do what we must do." Standing Cloud's voice carried no bravado, only the resigned certainty of a man who had seen the future and accepted its harsh realities. "But first I would speak with you, Eleanor McKinnon, about a different matter." Something in his tone made both women look up sharply. Thomas gurgled contentedly against the chief's chest, his small fist tangled in the beadwork of Standing Cloud's shirt. "With me." Eleanor's voice came out smaller than she intended. "You have nowhere to go when you leave this place," Standing Cloud said with characteristic directness. "No family to return to, no husband to provide for you and the child. Dr. Henley has been kind, but this is not a permanent solution." The words stung because they were true. Eleanor had spent sleepless nights wrestling with exactly these realities. Her $23 had dwindled to $11. No respectable family would hire an unwed mother as a governess, and the other options available to destitute women on the frontier were too terrible to contemplate. "I'll find something," she said with more conviction than she felt. Standing Cloud studied her for a long moment, then gently transferred Thomas back to her arms. "Among my people, a woman with a child is never without a place. The tribe provides for all its members, and children especially are treasured." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I would offer you such a place if you have the courage to accept it." Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "You're asking me to come with you, to live with your people." "I am offering you a choice," Standing Cloud corrected. "My lodge has room for you and the child. My wife, Winona, has been hoping for another woman to help with the younger ones. She has grown children of her own, but still cares for 2 orphaned grandchildren. You could teach them your language and learning, while they teach you our ways." The proposal was so unexpected, so foreign to anything Eleanor had ever imagined, that she could only stare. Dr. Henley, however, leaned forward with interest. "Chief, that's That's incredibly generous. But surely your people would object to taking in a white woman. Standing Cloud's weathered face creased in what might have been amusement. My people judge by actions, not by the color of skin. Eleanor McKinnon has shown courage in protecting her child, intelligence in her questions, and kindness in her dealings with others. These are the qualities we value. His expression grew more serious. But I will not lie to you. The life would be hard. We live as our ancestors lived, following the buffalo, respecting the seasons. There are no wooden houses, no stores, no churches as you know them. Eleanor's mind raced. Everything she had been taught about Indians, everything she had read in newspapers and heard in church sermons, warred against the evidence of her own eyes. Standing Cloud was learned, thoughtful, and had shown her more genuine kindness in 3 days than her own community had managed in a lifetime. "What about the treaty negotiations?" she asked. "If the army won't let you return to the Black Hills, then we will face what comes together as a people." Standing Cloud's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. But until that day arrives, there is life to be lived, children to be raised, wisdom to be shared. Eleanor looked down at Thomas, who was studying her face with the serious expression that had become familiar over their weeks of hardship. What future could she offer him in the white world that had already rejected them both? He would grow up branded as illegitimate, forever carrying the shame of circumstances beyond his control. In Cheyenne or any other frontier town, the best he could hope for would be grudging acceptance. The worst didn't bear thinking about. "Your wife," Eleanor said slowly. "She would truly welcome us." "Winona lost a daughter 2 winters ago," Standing Cloud said gently. "The loss nearly broke her spirit. But she has told me that your child's laughter reminds her that life continues, that joy can return even after great sorrow." He studied Eleanor's face carefully. "She would welcome you not as charity, but as family." The word hung in the air between them. Family. The thing Eleanor had lost, Thomas had never known and both desperately needed. Dr. Henley cleared her throat. "Eleanor, you should know that if you make this choice, there likely won't be any going back. The army, the territorial government, your own people, they'll consider you lost to them, forever." Eleanor thought of her father's granite face, her mother's hidden tears, her sister's fearful eyes. Had she ever truly belonged in that world, or had she simply been playing a role that was always destined to end in rejection? "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "We leave at dawn tomorrow," Standing Cloud said. "The negotiations are finished, and winter is coming to the hills." Chapter 4, The Choice That Changes Everything. Eleanor spent that night walking the perimeter of Fort Laramie, Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms, despite the October chill. The stars above Wyoming burned with a clarity that seemed to mock the confusion in her heart. Each step took her further from the familiar sounds of the fort, soldiers calling to each other, horses stamping in their corrals, the distant harmonies of men singing around their evening fires. Tomorrow, Standing Cloud and his people would ride north toward the Black Hills, and whatever fate awaited them there. The choice he had offered her seemed both impossible and inevitable, like standing at the edge of a great river with no bridge in sight, but knowing that the far shore held everything she had ever truly wanted. "Can't sleep either." Eleanor turned to find Dr. Henley approaching, her medical bag in hand. Even in the darkness, the doctor moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being needed at all hours. "I keep thinking I'm dreaming," Eleanor admitted. 3 days ago I was ready to beg for work scrubbing floors. Now I'm considering this." Dr. Henley fell into step beside her. "I've been on the frontier for 6 years, Eleanor. I've seen what happens to women in your situation. Most end up in brothels or dead from desperation. The lucky ones find work as washwomen and spend their lives being reminded of their shame." She paused beside the fort's main gate, where Standing Cloud's horses were hobbled for the night. "What that man offered you today, I've never seen anything like it." "But they're Indians," Eleanor said, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her all evening. "Everything I've been taught, everything I've read, everything you've been taught was written by people who never knew a single Lakota person," Dr. Henley interrupted. "I've treated Standing Cloud's warriors, delivered babies for his women, sat in council when they needed medical advice. They're no more savage than the men who threw you out of your home for bearing a child conceived in love." The words stung because they held truth. Eleanor thought of Lieutenant Crawford, who had whispered promises of marriage before his transfer orders came through. He had been charming, educated, everything her strict upbringing had taught her to value in a man. Yet when faced with consequences, he had chosen his career over her welfare. Standing Cloud, branded as heathen by her father's church, had shown more Christian charity than any Christian she had known. "What about Thomas?" Eleanor asked, shifting her son to her other arm. "What kind of life would he have among them?" "A better one than he'll have as a bastard child in any territorial town," Dr. Henley said bluntly. Standing Cloud's people raised children communally. Thomas would have dozens of aunts and uncles, grandparents who would tell him stories, cousins who would teach him to ride and hunt and be proud of who he is. She touched Eleanor's shoulder gently. More importantly, he would never know shame for the circumstances of his birth. They walked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the distant howl of a coyote and the soft rustle of prairie grass in the wind. Finally, Dr. Henley spoke again. "There's something else you should consider. I've been watching Standing Cloud's people these past few days. They know what's coming. The army will never let them stay in the Black Hills much longer, but they're not running toward defeat. They're choosing to live free for as long as they can, to raise their children in the old ways while they still have the chance." Eleanor stopped walking. "You think they're going to die, don't you? All of them." "I think they're going to live," Dr. Henley corrected. "Really live, according to their own values and beliefs until they can't anymore. That's more than most people manage, Eleanor. More than you'll manage if you stay in the white world that's already rejected you." As if summoned by their conversation, a figure approached from the direction of the Lakota camp. Standing Cloud moved through the darkness with the silent grace that had made him legendary among army scouts, appearing beside them so quietly that Eleanor started. "Forgive me," he said in his careful English. "I could not sleep and saw figures by the gate. I wanted to be sure there was no trouble." "No trouble," Dr. Henley assured him. "Just a woman trying to make the most important decision of her life." Standing Cloud studied Eleanor in the starlight, his weathered face unreadable. "You have questions. Ask them." The directness was so typical of him that Eleanor almost smiled despite her turmoil. "Your people, will they really accept us? A white woman and her half-breed child." The ugly word hung in the air like a curse, but Standing Cloud showed no reaction to it. "Among the Lakota, there are no half-breed children. There are only children. Your son has Lakota eyes, dark and intelligent. He will be raised to use those eyes to see clearly, to understand both worlds he was born between." Standing Cloud paused. "That understanding may serve him well in the times that are coming. And me? What would be my place? You would be Winona's sister, my daughter in the eyes of the tribe. You would teach our children your language and your learning. You would learn our ways, our stories, our understanding of how to live in harmony with the world." His voice grew softer. "You would be home, Eleanor McKinnon. Not a visitor, not a curiosity, but truly home." The word pierced her heart like an arrow. Home. She had thought her father's house in Cheyenne was home, but home was supposed to be a place where you were loved unconditionally, where your worth wasn't measured by your mistakes. "Home was supposed to be safe. If I come with you," she said slowly, "and the army follows and there's fighting, then we will face what comes as we always have, together. But you and the child would be protected. This I promise you." Eleanor looked down at Thomas, whose dark eyes were open now, studying the star-filled sky with the wonder that only infants possess. In that moment, she realized that her choice had been made the instant Standing Cloud had first held her son and declared him strong. Everything since then had simply been her mind catching up to what her heart already knew. "Dr. Henley," she said quietly, "would you do something for me?" "Of course. If anyone ever asks what happened to Eleanor McKinnon and her child, would you tell them we died of fever on the prairie, that we never made it to Fort Laramie?" Dr. Henley was quiet for a long moment, understanding the finality of what Eleanor was asking. "And if someone should ask about a white woman living among the Lakota?" Eleanor looked directly into Standing Cloud's eyes, seeing there the promise of acceptance she had searched for her entire life. "Tell them she was never white at all, just lost until she found her people." Standing Cloud nodded gravely as if witnessing an oath. "Then it is decided. At dawn you begin a new life." As they walked back toward the fort together, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the deep, bone-settling peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Chapter 5. Finding Home in the Sacred Hills. 6 months had passed since Eleanor McKinnon ceased to exist, and Wakinhin Wynne, thoughtful woman, took her place among the Lakota. The transformation had been as complete as shedding one skin for another, though the process had tested every assumption she had ever held about civilization, survival, and what it meant to be human. Winter in the Black Hills had been harsh beyond anything Eleanor's frontier upbringing had prepared her for, yet she had never felt more secure. The Lakota camp, hidden in a sheltered valley where hot springs kept the worst cold at bay, had become a world unto itself. 47 souls living in perfect harmony with the land and each other. Standing Cloud's lodge, made of buffalo hide and wooden poles, had proven warmer and more comfortable than her father's drafty wooden house in Cheyenne. Thomas, now called Kante Waste Goodheart, had thrived beyond all expectation. At 9 months old, he babbled equally in English and Lakota, his sturdy legs carrying him on adventures that would have horrified his Presbyterian grandmother. Winona, Standing Cloud's wife, had embraced both mother and child with a fierce protectiveness that spoke of a woman who had loved deeply and lost much. "He will be walking soon," Winona observed, watching Thomas pull himself upright against a parfleche container painted with geometric designs. Her English had improved dramatically over the winter months, just as Eleanor's Lakota had progressed from halting phrases to conversational fluency. "My grandson never moved so quickly at this age." Eleanor looked up from the beadwork she was learning, her fingers still clumsy compared to Winona's fluid artistry. "He's fearless. Sometimes I worry he'll wander off into the forest." Winona laughed, the sound warm as summer thunder. "Lakota children do not wander, they explore. There is a difference." She gestured toward the lodge opening, where the sounds of children playing echoed through the camp. "Listen, the other little ones are teaching him where he belongs." It was true. Thomas had been absorbed into the tribe's communal child-rearing with seamless acceptance. The older children, ranging from 6 to 16, had adopted him as a younger brother, teaching him games that stretched back generations while protecting him with the casual vigilance of experienced siblings. Eleanor had initially worried about leaving him in their care, but she had quickly learned that among the Lakota, every adult was responsible for every child, and every child was treasured as the future of the people. "Wachin Hin Win." Standing Cloud's voice came from outside the lodge, using the name that still made Eleanor's heart skip with wonder. "Would you walk with me? There are things we must discuss." Eleanor set aside her beadwork and followed him out into the April afternoon. Spring had come late to the Black Hills, but now the valley was alive with new growth, wildflowers dotting the meadows, aspen trees showing their first pale green leaves, and the creek running high with snowmelt. It was a place of such pristine beauty that Eleanor understood why Standing Cloud's people considered it sacred. They walked in comfortable silence to a rise overlooking the camp, where they could see the entire community going about the rhythms of daily life. Women tended fires and prepared meals. Men worked on weapons and tools. Children played elaborate games that served as training for adult responsibilities, and elders sat in circles, sharing stories that preserved the tribe's collective memory. "You have adapted well to our ways," Standing Cloud said finally. "Better than I hoped when I made my offer at the fort." "I had good teachers," Eleanor replied, her Lakota now fluid enough that she often thought in the language. "And I had nowhere else to go." Standing Cloud studied her with the penetrating gaze that had made her so nervous during their first meeting. "That was true 6 months ago. It is not true now." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What do you mean?" "Scouts have brought word from the agencies. The government is offering amnesty to any white captives willing to return to their own people." Standing Cloud's voice remained carefully neutral. "No questions asked about how they came to be with the tribes or what they might have learned during their time among us." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. After months of feeling truly at home for the first time in her life, the outside world was intruding with the promise of redemption and the implication that she needed redeeming. "They think I'm a captive," she said slowly. "The army believes what the army chooses to believe. In their understanding, no white woman would willingly choose to live among Indians." Standing Cloud's tone carried a trace of bitter amusement. "They cannot conceive that someone might find our way of life preferable to their own." Eleanor looked down at her hands, which bore the calluses of hide working and the small scars of learning to cook over an open fire. Her nails were short and practical, her palms strong from months of labor that her schoolteacher's life had never demanded. She wore traditional Lakota dress now, a buckskin dress decorated with beadwork that told the story of her adoption into the tribe. her hair braided in the style of married women despite her technical status as a widow. Do they know about Thomas? The reports speak only of a white woman. Whether they know about County Waste or simply choose not to mention him, Standing Cloud shrugged. It matters little. The offer stands regardless. A sound from the camp drew their attention, Thomas's delighted laughter, as one of the older boys taught him to throw small stones into the creek. Watching him, Eleanor felt the fierce protectiveness that had driven every decision since his birth. In the white world, he would always be marked by his illegitimate status, always fighting for acceptance that might never come. Here, he was simply a beloved child with unlimited potential. What would happen if I stayed? She asked. If I ignored their offer? Standing Cloud was quiet for a long time. His weathered face turned toward the sacred peaks that surrounded their valley. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of prophecy. War is coming, Wasinhin. Perhaps not this year or the next, but soon. The government grows impatient with tribes that refuse to submit to reservation life. When that war arrives, there will be no mercy for those who chose to stand with us. He looked directly at her. If you stay, you will share whatever fate awaits our people. Your white skin will not protect you or County Waste. And if I go back, you would live. You would be safe. Perhaps you could even reclaim some version of the life you had before. His voice grew softer. But you would never again be truly home. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the warm sun on her face and hearing the sounds of the only community where she had ever felt completely accepted. When she opened them again, Thomas was looking up at her from the creek bank, his dark eyes bright with happiness and utterly trusting in her ability to protect him. Standing Cloud, she said quietly. 6 months ago, you asked if I had the courage to accept a new life. I'm asking you the same question now. Do I have the courage to choose my family over my safety? The chief's weathered face creased in a smile that transformed his stern features. Wasinhin, you had that courage the moment you chose to love your child, more than the approval of people who would condemn him. Everything since then has simply been practice. Eleanor nodded, feeling a deep calm settle in her bones. When the government scouts came with their offers of amnesty and redemption, they would find no white captive in need of rescue. They would find only a Lakota woman who had chosen her people and would stand with them through whatever storms were coming. As they walked back toward the camp, Thomas broke free from his playmates and ran toward her on unsteady legs, his arms outstretched and his face radiant with joy. Eleanor scooped him up, spinning him in a circle that made him shriek with delight, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The sacred hills stretched endlessly around them, holding secrets older than memory and promises that would outlast whatever tomorrow might bring. Here in this hidden valley where hot springs sang lullabies and children learned to see with their hearts as well as their eyes, Eleanor McKinnon had finally found her way home. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as a family, as a people, as part of something larger and more enduring than the small, frightened world she had left behind. The story of Wasinhin had only just begun.